Okay, it's 3 o'clock. Everybody, welcome. I think people are slowly joining, and more will likely join as we move along. Hello and welcome to this webinar. I'm really happy to welcome you all to Think Tank Europa's webinar on the Polish presidential election, which will take place on May 18th. So really very shortly. And especially because this is such an important and possibly decisive election, because since, Prime Minister Tusk entered into office with his government in December 23, Polish politics has sort of suffered from a kind of a gridlock situation. And I think it's fair to say that observers both in Poland and abroad have sort of hoped that the government of these controversial judicial reforms that the peace government passed during their 8 years in power. However, and that's where the presidential election becomes really important, Tusk is currently working with a PIS president, so Andrzej Duda, who is using his right of veto to sort of block political projects. And therefore, the presidential elections could prove crucial if the Liberal candidate, Rafał Trzaskowski, wins the election. It could sort of pave the way for far-reaching political reforms on rule of law, on abortion, on some of these, or media freedom, some of these high-ranking issues. But on the other hand, we might also have an opposition candidate winning, like Karol Nawrocki, close to the Peace Party, and we'll then explore, will this then mean that Polish politics will be stuck in deadlock, and what will this all mean for Europe? So, without further ado, and sort of to discuss these questions, I'm really happy that we will be in excellent hands for the next 45 minutes. We're very lucky to be joined by you, Jakub Jarachewski, who's joining us from Poznan. You are the research coordinator at Democracy Reporting International, which is based in Berlin, and you're also an internationally renowned expert on Polish politics and questions regarding the rule of law. So, Jakub, we're really happy to have you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm very happy for this opportunity to talk about the upcoming vote.
And we will of course have time to ask questions as we move along from the audience. We'll do that towards the end of the session, so please do write down any questions that you may have for Jakub in the chat, and we'll attempt to answer as many as possible. Right, I think, Jakub, let's just dive right in. And I will sort of start by asking for your broad sort of take on this election. So basically, if you could explain to us, why is this presidential election important or interesting? What makes it important for Polish politics? And why is it important to sort of make a webinar about?
So I would maybe start with a very quick recap of what is exactly the role and powers of the Polish president, because this is a rather unusual situation. The Polish president is elected for 5-year terms in a direct popular vote, so much like the president of France, for example. However, in practice, their powers are much weaker than in most cases of directly elected presidents. The president of Poland is part of the executive power, but they share this executive power with the prime minister and the government. And for most practical purposes, the prime minister and the government are in the driving seat. The Polish system, I think that the best parallel in Europe would be Finland, a country where also the president is elected directly in a popular vote. However, they have rather limited powers. Yet at the same time, those powers are greater than in case of, say, presidents of Germany or other mostly ceremonial presidential offices. So the president of Poland has limited powers. However, in some particular context, those powers can manifest as particularly strong. And I would say that the most important part is the president's ability to block legislation passed by the parliament, either by employing a legislative veto, which the parliament can defeat. However, defeating the veto requires a qualified majority. And in the Polish political landscape, as of now, the ruling coalition is unable to attain this majority, is unable to defeat a presidential veto. It would have to enlist the opposition to do so. And the second power is the power to refer laws for review by the Constitutional Tribunal, which can be done prior to signing those laws into force. And this is important to mind that currently the Polish Constitutional Tribunal is still a not independent, politically captured institution, which is fully staffed by judges appointing during the peace era, with two of those judges currently sitting there being unlawfully appointed, as found out by the European Court of Human Rights. So sending a case there prior to its signing can also be an effective block, and I would say even more effective than the veto, because if the Constitutional Tribunal finds this law to be incompatible with the Constitution, then the president has to oblige and refuse to sign the law. So, in effect, over the last 1.5 years of a very rocky cohabitation between President Duda and Tusk government, we have seen this exactly play out. The president was able to effectively block several areas of the government's activity. Fortunately, President Duda was not completely obstructive, and he did sign into force many laws concerning economy, energy, defense and security, social benefits, and so on and so on. However, the President Duda has been adamantly against several initiatives of the Tusk government regarding the rule of law, but also a couple of other items, quite importantly, LGBT plus rights, abortion, and also diplomacy and ambassadorial nominations. So this vote, where first round happening this Sunday, and an almost inevitable second round coming 2 weeks later, is de facto a vote on whether and to what degree will the Tusk government be able to advance its agenda on several fronts. The rule of law and the repair of judiciary being perhaps the most important one, because President Duda has been almost completely uncooperative on this. And so whether the new president will be an ally of Prime Minister Tusk or his opponent will determine the fate of the Polish rule of law reform. Because if the new president will be not willing to cooperate, then this reform will stall. And Poland will find itself in a very awkward place for many reasons, not the least because of the promises Poland made to the European Commission regarding repair of the rule of law, and that this rule of law repair will happen sooner or later. If the new president will be not an ally of the government, then almost certainly this will be stalled. So in a way, this vote is many things. It is, among others, a vote on whether a kind of a vote of approval of Tusk's policies and actions so far. Those who vote on candidates who, to various degrees, endorse Tusk and claim that they will support or work with him constructively, are the voters who, to some degree, approve of Tusk's government agenda. Those who vote against, who vote for candidates who claim to be either an obstacle for Tusk or to be difficult partners, those are people who are critical of the government. So in a way, this presidential vote becomes a confidence vote of sorts on the Tusk government after 1.5 years of its operation.
But let's stay with that for just a moment. So if we look at what the Tusk government has pledged to do, but also what it has managed to do, like could we talk about what are his achievements so far? I mean, has it been a complete gridlock? Has there been nothing sort of able to be produced legislatively because of this president, or has he in fact, Donald Tusk, been able to sort of drive some things forward despite the cohabitation?
So, as I mentioned, President Duda has not been a big obstacle in several areas: economy, defense, and security, social policies being some examples. Here, most of the laws have been signed into the force and have been advanced. So this had not been a complete, let's say, deadlock. However, there are areas where President Duda is unwilling to cooperate with Prime Minister Tusk. It's difficult to find a coherent key on which policies are affected, but I would say that certainly those areas that kind of flag for a conservative part of the society as cultural items. So, for example, LGBT rights, introducing civil partnerships in Poland, or having some degree of liberalization of abortion laws, certainly this. Then comes the rule of law and the judiciary, where President Duda has been blocking pretty much almost all initiatives of the government, and the kind of key which I was perhaps able to identify here is that President Duda has been the more uncooperative, the more the proposed reforms would touch something related to his power and competencies. For example, President in Poland appoints judges. And when the government undertook to reform the system of judicial appointments and has now tabled a draft law on resolving the status of judges appointed over the last 7 years, the so-called neo-judges, President Duda has quickly indicated that he is not going to go along with this at any rate. So Donald Tusk has been able to move several items forward. He has been stopped by President Duda on a few other fronts. But also let's remember the fact that some of the constraints also come from within the ruling coalition. The ruling coalition in Poland is comprised of centrist liberals, Tusk's party, the left-wing alliance of social democratic and socialist parties, and the center-right and agrarian coalition. And those coalition partners also are constraints, especially when it comes to items which are crucial to one edge of the political spectrum, but the opposite edge of the political spectrum is not as welcome about it. So in general, it has been a difficult cohabitation, I would say rocky at many times, but not a complete full stop. What is a worry of Prime Minister Tusk's party is that if the winner of the upcoming presidential election will be the peace-backed candidate Nawrocki, then that will come to a complete stop, and that the opposition against Tusk's reformist agenda will be simply destructive and will aim to stop everything that Tusk is trying to do. They are also probably worried about the far-right candidate Sławomir Mentzen, who is kind of a wildcard of this election and has disrupted in many ways what people have seen as an increasing polarization and divide of Polish political scene into two camps. The far right kind of move in between this because their agenda, while nationalistic and conservative in some ways, is different than one from PiS. The Confederacja is far more a libertarian party. And so in many ways, this is going to move forward. This actually could result in the scenario where a new president will be even more difficult to work with for Prime Minister Tusk than Duda is. Duda, who ultimately stopped short of being a complete obstacle and has been a difficult and rocky, but ultimately in many areas a partner for the government.
Very interesting, and especially I think the perspective also that, I mean, it's not going to be all fine and good if Trzaskowski is elected, because there are still constraints from within the government. I think that's an extremely important point, because as you say, I mean, it is a very broad and diverse coalition. So that would have been my next question. I would like to, before we sort of move, you've already mentioned their names, before we talk about the candidates, I would like to sort of ask you one final question, which moves beyond sort of the legislative blockages by the president and sort of talk about the political situation. So if you could sort of perhaps elaborate on how this presidential election has affected the political environment around the Tusk government. I mean, in Europe, there's been a lot of talk about Poland being careful doing this and that internationally or in the European Union because there is a presidential election coming up. Could we talk about sort of this shadow, I guess, of the election working onto or sort of affecting Polish, Polish mobility within the European system?
Yes, I think that this presidential election has cast a long shadow on Polish politics. It has affected many areas. An example I have is the Polish presidency of the EU. Poland is holding the rotating presidency until the end of June. It has taken over after a very difficult presidency led by Hungary. And of course, the Polish presidency has improved on a lot of fronts, taking over from Viktor Orban, and has moved forward many items. However, I can shake the feeling that the Polish presidency has been rather muted and rather careful, especially with regards to topics that could play out domestically, and those topics that could be weaponized by the opposition and used to attack the government. We have seen some really good and hard work from the Polish team running the presidency. However, we have seen very little in terms of advancing controversial topics or in trying to trying to move forward on agendas that are divisive, especially divisive domestically in Poland. And I think that this carefulness, this caution has been caused by the presidential election and by the fact that the Tusk government has been unwilling to expose itself politically, domestically, while carrying this presidency. The second interplay which I would highlight is the Trump administration. The Polish government is not on the same page with Trump administration on many fronts, be it Ukraine, be it the trade war, be it the general political alignment of Trump and his administration on several items. However, the Polish government has been extremely careful in its criticism of Trump and the American government. There has been very little in way of the direct confrontation of challenge or criticism. The role of transatlanticism and the role of the United States as a security provider in Poland is very significant in Polish politics. And there is a keen perception that even with Trump in power, the military presence of the United States is the most efficient way of ensuring Polish defense against possible threat from Russia and Belarus. And so attacking Trump and criticizing him openly would expose the government to domestic criticism over trying to upend the Polish-American alliance. And in fact, even without this direct criticism, there has been already multiple instances of the American factor figuring out this election. Just today, we've learned that several members of the U.S. House of Representatives Judiciary Committee have sent a letter to the European Commission demanding it to take action concerning the alleged breach of rule of law by Tusk government. This is, of course, speaking to the various actions that the Tusk government has taken with regards to people appointed during the peace era, with several of them being charged over crimes and with several of them being removed from office. However, it seems like there is some sort of exchange and a friendly rapport between the Trump administration and peace, which results in situations like the peace candidate Nawrocki meeting Trump, or this letter from the members of the Judiciary Committee being sent to the European Commission. So this second, I would say, long shadow, which is being cast in, which is making the Polish political environment very tricky minefield to navigate for most candidates, but perhaps for Tusk and his candidate Rafał Trzaskowski the most.
And I mean, that's a wonderful bridge into talking, especially in particular about the candidates, because I think it's interesting to also get a gist of who are these people, in fact. So if we start with Trzaskowski and look at who he is, I mean, his political profile, but perhaps especially also the main challenges for him. I mean, because he is a liberal candidate, he's from a big city, but he has to also somehow appeal to a more conservative voter base, I suppose. Could you elaborate on sort of first his political profile and then sort of the political challenge that he's facing, Trzaskowski?
Sure. So Rafał Trzaskowski is currently the mayor of Warsaw. The mayor of Warsaw is traditionally in Poland a rather highly politically exposed position. I would compare it, let's say, domestically at least, to the mayor of London or the mayor of Paris in terms of recognition and in terms of, let's say, presence in Polish politics. Trzaskowski is a member of the Civic Coalition, Tusk's close ally and friend for a long time. Trzaskowski ran in the 2020 presidential elections against Andrzej Duda. He came into the second round and narrowly lost. However, that loss did not prevent him from keeping high on the Polish political agenda and did not deter him from running again. Trzaskowski, who is a liberal, a big city person, educated and very much appearing as this kind of a centrist candidate, faces challenges which you must very well summed up. Is the challenge of connecting from the one side into the rural and small town conservative electorate, of which many support peace, but some support the agrarian party and Tusk's coalition partner Polska 2050. people who are conservative but are not willing to vote for peace or Confederacja. On the other hand, Trzaskowski has to build bridges with the left, and especially on the far left among voters of leftist parties. That's also a challenge, as they see him as being too liberal, too centrist, and unwilling to push on items such as LGBT rights or rights of migrants. So classic challenges of a centrist candidate, how to reach onto the both ends of the political spectrum without going too far into either direction, and how to read the current political room in the country and try to feel what exactly are the centrist liberal voters into and what do they expect from the candidate.
But just to pick up on his sort of the fact that he has to have a double appeal to the conservatives, but also to the left wing, because since there is no, well, there is Adrian Sandberg, of course, but I mean there is no candidate to the left of him who has an actual chance of getting into the run-up. So isn't this sort of just I mean, because Nawrocki is under pressure from Mensen on the right, but there is no sort of pressure on Trzaskowski from the left. So isn't this sort of just if you're a lefty, you have nowhere else to go but to the liberal mayor of
What you described, Mats, is a kind of a classic Polish political dynamic in which the centrist candidate is facing mostly challenges from the right. So they will be trying to fight for support from conservative but not too far right voters, and will generally lurch to the right when it comes to reaching out of their safe zone. However, while there is no direct threat from a left candidate, neither from the far left candidate Adrian Zandberg or the Democratic left candidate Magdalena Biejat. Still, Trzaskowski, I believe, needs to be mindful of the risk that if he passes into the second round, then the left voters might just stay home if they believe that they have been ignored and left behind, and the sentiments that they speak to are not being addressed in any way. This is kind of a classic dilemma of trying to reach too far in one direction, but being mindful of the fact that you might alienate the voters on the other side. And, you know, the classic assumption of the Polish centrist parties, and in particular of Tusk's party, is that in such scenario, the left wing supporters will switch their votes to Tusk's party and Tusk's candidate anyway, because they have no better choice to make. But this is a very risky assumption, and it has in the past played out negatively. So we will see in the second round whether Trzaskowski will try to steer a little bit to the left for a change, and try to ensure that those people who are perhaps willing to vote for him, but as we say in Poland, while holding up their nose, because this is not their favorite vote, and they are doing this mostly to ensure that the worst choice does not get elected, whether they will actually turn up at the voting stations or will they stay home.
Okay, so a difficult balancing act I see between mobilizing and demobilizing. Let's move on to the peace candidate Karol Nawrocki. What could we say about him? I mean, as I've understood, Duda is unable to run again, so they've had to change candidate. What is his track record, and what does he want politically, Nawrocki?
Nawrocki has had insofar a remarkable career of being a historian and ultimately becoming the head of the National Institute of Remembrance, the Polish memory history and politics history institution. Nawrocki officially runs as an unaffiliated grassroots candidate who is supported by PiS. However, for all practical purposes, he is the PiS candidate because his entire staff and his entire messaging, it's all PiS 100%. So in a way, I think that he is a compromise candidate within PiS, as multiple factions of this party have struggled against each other in order to win the right to nominate the candidate. And Nawrocki emerged as kind of a compromise between all those discussions. He doesn't have a high political profile and experience, and it shows on the campaign trail insofar. and has not been recognized as a political figure as opposed to other candidates who, for one reason or another, have rather strong political standing. I would say that looking at Nawrocki's profile, I think that of all the candidates who run, he would be perhaps most dependent on his political party that supports him and most dependent on their policies and most expected to be on board with anything that the party wants. That I don't expect that in case of his victory, there would be much distance between him and PiS. And even compared to Andrzej Duda, who on occasions would oppose PiS and on occasions would buckle the trend of being a PiS candidate and would rarely, very rarely, but still stop some of the PiS reforms or oppose them meaningfully. I think that Nawrocki would be simply a person who would very closely follow the party lines and do what PiS wants to be done exactly. And which makes me expect that if he were to win, he would be far more disruptive for the Tusk government and far more involved in ensuring that the Tusk government gets nothing done, so that in the next parliamentary election in 2027, the chances of peace will be higher. Yes, so that would be it. Maybe about Nawrocki. Currently, one of the key topics of Polish presidential campaign is a controversy concerning how many apartments does Mr. Nawrocki have. It's a touchy subject in Poland, a country which is experiencing a housing crisis. The state of play is that Nawrocki officially spoke about having just one flat, like many people, like most people in Poland do, but was later found out that he owns a second apartment, an apartment where an elderly disabled person is living, who was promised support by Nawrocki, but this support did not materialize, and this has become the primary talking topic of the Polish presidential campaign over the last couple of days.
Yeah, I've been able to follow it, and of course, not a good story for him so shortly before the election, and I guess especially also since he has another candidate to compete with, and namely from Konfederacja, so Sławomir Mencen. I think it would be interesting to sort of look at him also, because I mean the situation that you describe now is, I mean, if Nawrocki wins, it could go from bad to worse. But I guess if Mencen wins, it would go from bad to really bad, or how should we sort of categorize him?
So Sławomir Mencen is one of the leaders of the party Konfederacja. Konfederacja is the far-right nationalist libertarian party in Poland. It's a party which is in many ways similar, but also very different from far-right parties elsewhere in Europe. It's a party that runs very strongly on small government / the taxes libertarian agenda in an attempt to appeal to self-employed voters, businesses. But I would say that primarily Konfederacja can be characterized as a party which aims at young, frustrated men who see a significant part of their salary disappear as taxes and social contributions to it, and who let's say, too young and too healthy to actually benefit from many social welfare programs in support of the state, and who feel like they have been abandoned and ignored by subsequent governments focused mostly on the middle-aged and elderly sectors in the society, as well as couples with children and basically everybody but not young men. So Konfederacja has been an amalgam of multiple movements. It has in the recent years consequently tried to remove some of the most extremist far-right elements. One sign of this is the fact that perhaps the most controversial member of Konfederacja, Grzegorz Braun, an anti-Semitic politician famous for his public stance against the Jewish minority and against Ukrainians, has been expelled and is now running as a separate presidential candidate. It's a sign of something what we've seen already with, for example, Meloni's party in Italy, a shift toward the censure by the far right in order to appeal to a median voter. Mencen is the wild card of this election, and for many ways. He has been going up and down in polls, at one point almost taking over Nawrocki, but then fading back. His presidential campaign is unorthodox. It's carried out mostly online and the social media, especially heavy use of TikTok, as this is the medium which reaches to young people in Poland. Were he to be elected, I think that it would be very interesting because Mencen must be mindful of the fact that a lot of his presidency would reflect on Confederacja, and him being fully obstructive and fully uncooperative might not be as beneficial to Confederacja as Nawrocki being obstructive would be beneficial. A lot of voters, in particular median voters in Poland, expect the president to be a person who is not causing too much trouble and a person who will to some way cooperate with the government, which is also one of the reasons I believe that Andrzej Duda has chosen the path of not being completely obstructive, is that there is this expectation that the president is a statesperson. It is a person who is working with the government on some items, not working on the others, but is a person that is advancing things forward. So I don't think that Mencen would be fully destructive and fully a block on Prime Minister Tusk's government, but I think Mencen would certainly oppose it very hard on several key areas, one of them being social policy, the other being, once again, LGBT rights and abortion, because Confederacja is a party which is positioning itself as a very conservative and far right on this. And also foreign policy, support for Ukraine, and relationship with the EU, where Confederacja is the most Eurosceptic of parties in the Polish political spectrum, and is also a party which is skeptical of both military support for Ukraine, but also very skeptical of supporting Ukrainian refugees in Poland, and going with its message that immigration is bad no matter what kind of form it takes, and that the Ukrainians have outstayed their welcome in Poland. So a wild card with very unpredictable possible outcome if he would to win the office.
Okay, super interesting. And his chances are, I mean, do you think he has a realistic chance of overtaking the peace candidate and making it into the second round, or is it completely off the table?
I'm going to play the card of not being a political scientist and not going into these kinds of predictions here. I would say even if Mencen doesn't get into the second round, he still has achieved a significant effect of disrupting this race, and is one of the elements that paradoxically is positive in a way that it stops the Polish politics from becoming fully polarized between the two camps. As long as both the far right and the left are represented in the race, and while the left-wing candidates don't have a credible shot at the second round, they are felt, seen, and present in this campaign. I think it's good because it's keeping the Polish political landscape from becoming fully divided between Tusk's and Kaczyński's camps. I don't believe that such polarization is healthy, and it's good that Poland avoids it. Although, of course, we're talking about the far right without the caveats. But still, I think it's an important role which Mencen has played in this election by ensuring that the Polish politics don't end up being divided into two.
Yeah, I mean a good point. We have 10 minutes left, so if there are any questions, please do put them in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. I would like to talk also just briefly about the meaning of this election for Europe and what it would mean for Poland's role in the European Union, especially if the power were to change, say if Trzaskowski came into power. So perhaps if we start with him, what would that mean concretely for Poland's role in the EU? I mean, looking at especially the rule of law agenda, but also sort of Poland's ability to cooperate more broadly in, say, the Weimar Triangle and other formats.
Trzaskowski's win would place the entirety of foreign policy in Poland in a single camp, which would make it easier for Tusk to conduct it. There will be no longer sharing any areas with Duda and having to coordinate with him, so that would make things easier. And European dimension, I think that a big win for Tusk would be the ability to legislate freely and to conduct the rule of law reform process, thus meeting the expectations of the European Commission that it elaborated while unlocking the recovery fund for Poland, and having this conclude in some credible way that the EU gave Poland money and Poland fulfilled the promise of restoring judicial independence and fixing the institutions. Now, that would be certainly a very strong gut. The majority of foreign policy in Poland is conducted by the government. So Tusk has been able to push his EU agenda forward so far without much obstruction. The presidency has been organized pretty much exclusively by the government and the prime minister. So not much change here, but it will be certainly easier for Tusk to work with his partners and also to deal with other formats such as the Weimar Triangle together with Germany and France if the entirety of the executive power would be with one political camp.
Sure, makes good sense. We have some questions in the chat, both related to the election campaign, in fact. So I think we'll pool them together. So the first question is what role does the current world situation in Poland, and especially Tusk's role, play in the election? And as an add-on, if there have been signs of foreign interference in this election, as we've seen, for instance, in Romania last December.
Yes, thank you very much for those questions. They are very good. First of all, well, the current security situation, the consequences of Trump presidency, they all have been playing a role into the election by making security and defense one of the key items. And absolutely the primary topic, apart from economy, which is always a topic in Poland, is the ability to protect the country in many dimensions in terms of rearmament, in terms of the security at the Polish-Belarusian border, also a key topic, and defense against Russian threat. So absolutely, this has made a top priority for all the candidates to position themselves as being able to credibly strengthen the security of Poland. There have been signs of foreign interference, absolutely. There has been already there are analysis out there showcasing an uptick in disinformation being shared in the Polish social media. There is far more activity with regards to trying to turn people in Poland away from supporting Ukraine. I think it all clearly shows that majority of this disinformation is coming from Russia, and this is absolutely no surprise. It is in the interest of Russia to disrupt the Polish politics as much as possible and to, of course, hopefully have a candidate as a president who will be supportive of the Russian cause, but if not, then to cause as much damage and disruption as possible. May I pick up just the questions as they go, or Mats, you want to?
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, the questions of energy transition. I am not an energy expert. However, one thing which I can say certainly is that President Duda has been blocking a couple of key bills regarding energy. He has not been, fortunately, an obstruction with regards to advancing the plans to build the Polish nuclear power plant. This is on track, and this is moving forward, and Poland will be embarking on the path towards nuclear. However, one crucial bill which the government has been unable to move forward is the one on allowing more onshore wind power plants to be constructed. During the peace times, a law was passed which practically made it impossible to install new wind turbines in Poland due to the requirement of a minimum distance from the nearest buildings. There is a draft bill which is supposed to remove this limitation. However, Duda has been opposed to it, so it's also waiting for a new president who will be hopefully more open. And that's all. But in general, I think that this is also another area where we will see much movement if Trzaskowski wins, and we might see not movement at all if the other candidates win, especially given that Konfederacja is a very much a pro-coal, anti-green party.
If I could just follow up with a question on Poland's green policy now that we're at it, because I think it's interesting that I mean it's also the Tusk camp is critical of, say, the EU's Green Deal to a certain extent at least. So I mean, what could we expect? I mean, is Poland's green policy, especially towards the EU, just sort of an area of continuity between the different governments and the different presidents, or is it something that would in fact look different if power were to change?
I think that in many ways, this kind of toning down the support for the European Green Deal has been part of the political campaign. And in practice, what I expect to happen is that the government will likely support some kind of revision of the Green Deal, but will not go against it altogether. Probably moving in lockstep with Germany, where there has also been talks about a correction of the green policy and making it more realistic, as sort of an appeasement towards the parts of society anxious about the Green Deal, but without abandoning it altogether.
Okay, go ahead. So we have another question about that some people turn against refugees, immigrants from Ukraine. How this is turning into a political matter and what role it will or is playing already in this election. You've mentioned it a bit already, but
yes, absolutely. The support for Ukrainian refugees is falling in Poland as time goes on, and this has also been featured in the election. Trzaskowski, who represents Tusk's party, who have been some of the most vocal pro-Ukrainian voices in Polish politics, has pretty much kept the Ukrainian matters out of the election campaign completely, but has backed a measure to reduce social security support for Ukrainians, conditioning it on people being employed and kind of trying to pass the message that the government will clamp down on migrants, refugees who are abusing the social security system. So, and of course, we're seeing far more anti-Ukrainian messaging from Confederacja. And PiS, which also has been supportive of Ukraine when it was in the government, is also now somewhat quiet on the topic. So it is reflected. I think that the political campaign reflects the fatigue and the falling support in Polish society, maybe not towards Ukraine completely, but towards the refugees who are staying already for a couple of years with no quick resolution of the conflict, and they return inside.
There is a question also on Danish-Polish relations. I don't know. I mean, this is of course a Danish webinar, so I don't know if you're sort of versed in this particular area. Could we say something about the Danish-Polish relations? Perhaps also I mean, now the presidency is switching from Poland to Denmark. I mean, I don't know if there's something interesting there.
I think that some key areas to highlight here is certainly the cooperation with regards to the Baltic Sea, and I think that this will continue, and change in the presidency will not alter this dynamic much. Ultimately, foreign policy and security policy is mostly with the government, so things won't alter here heavily. I think that what could actually also happen is perhaps more of looking of the Polish government into how the Danish government has tackled migration, and perhaps looking for some inspiration here, as in general migration is becoming more and more on topic, not just speaking about the Ukrainian refugees and migrants, but also a slowly but steadily trickling a stream of economic migrants from other corners of the world, and increasing conversations in the Polish society how to deal with this. But in general, I think that the relationship will remain very good and very warm. There are a lot of common interests of both countries, both regionally and globally. So I don't think that this election will impact that much.
Good to hear. I mean, from a Danish perspective, that our good relationship won't be affected too heavily. I think we have time for the last question, which is from Maria, who asks if the government has a plan if their candidate wins. I mean, will we see a lot of legislation just after the end of the election, or what can we expect from sort of the aftermath?
There are certainly plans. Trzaskowski has mentioned that the first bills that he wants to see on his desk if he becomes president would be the bills on the Constitutional Tribunal, the bill on abortion, and the bill on the language rights of the Silesian minority. But in practice, I think that the amount of bills could be very high, as many things have been held up by President Duda. And a challenge for the Polish government will be how to prioritize this, how to optimize the working of the parliament to ensure that those bills land on the new president's desks as soon as possible. And especially given that the president will begin their term in August, and this will leave us with just slightly over 2 years before the next parliamentary election. And there will be huge pressure from all sides to prioritize certain bills and to advance them faster so that policies might be implemented and so that impact of those bills can be felt before the parliamentary election. What I actually believe we could see is a lot of wrangling inside of the government and inside of the ruling coalition, as everybody will be wanting to have their own item approved by the president first. And knowing that summer is pretty much a dead time in Polish parliamentarism and work will only resume in September, there will be immense race to get as many things signed and passed as possible. And that will likely cause some friction, and that will force the Polish ruling coalition to prioritize items. We'll be very interested to see what happens. Of course, I would be very much happy to see the rule of law related bills come first. But I am aware that in such situations, probably the public polling comes first, and what the voters consider to be priority items to go as first. So even if the Trzaskowski wins and Tusk's reformist agenda will be enabled, there will be still a lot of difficult choices and tough questions to answer for the Polish government and for the ruling coalition regarding what comes first.
Excellent. I mean, then we have an occasion to meet up in September again, or in December maybe, to see how things are going. Thank you so much, Jakub. It was really, really super interesting and very nice of you to share your insights into Polish politics. It's a bit over already now, so thank you so much. Thank you to all who have joined. And I mean, we'll stay in touch, Jakub. All the best of luck for Sunday.
Thank you very much. Just maybe one thing to mention, my organization will be publishing a comparison of the manifestos of candidates in the election and then a scenario building document after the first round, depending on who passes into the round two. So follow us for more updates on the Polish election, as particular for rule of law and human rights. This is a very crucial vote.
Perfect. We'll stay on the lookout for them. Take care. Thank you to all, and have a nice afternoon.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.